Nothing is so difficult to distinguish as the nuances which separate unmerited misfortune from an adversity produced by vice. How many miseries are simultaneously the result of both these causes? What profound knowledge must be presumed about the character of each man and of the circumstances in which he has lived? Where will you find the magistrate who will have the conscience, the time, the talent, the means of devoting himself to such an examination? Who would dare to let a poor man die of hunger because it's his own fault that he is dying? Who will hear his cries and reason about his vices? Even personal interest is restrained when confronted by the sight of other men's misery. Would the interests of the public treasury really prove to be more successful? Who, being the judge of joy or suffering, life or death, of a large segment of his fellow men, would not shrink before the exercise of such terrible power? The laws may declare that only innocent poverty will be relieved. Practice will alleviate all poverty. He says any measure which establishes legal charity on a permanent basis and gives it an administrative form thereby creates an idle and lazy class living at the expense of the industrial and working class. This, at least, is its inevitable consequence, if not the immediate result. It reproduces all the vices of the monastic system, minus the high ideals of morality and religion, which often went along with it. Such a law is a bad seed planted in the legal structure. Circumstances, as in America, can prevent the seed from developing rapidly, but they cannot destroy it, and if the present generation escapes its influence, it will devour the well-being of generations to come. If you closely observe the condition of populations among whom such legislation has long been in force, you will easily discover that the effects are not less unfortunate for morality than for public prosperity, and that it depraves men even more than it impoverishes them. So this is where he really starts to talk about the effect that free money has on morality. And this is back in the 1830s, and he saw this way back then. It was evident way back then. Again, I'm skipping a lot of things here, so do take a look at this. He says, individual almsgiving established valuable ties between the rich and the poor. The deed itself involves the giver in the fate of the one whose poverty he has undertaken to alleviate. The latter, supported by aid which he had no right to demand, and which he may have no hope of getting, feels inspired by gratitude. A moral tie is established between these two classes, whose interests and passions so often conspire to separate them from each other, and although divided by circumstance they are willingly reconciled. This is not the case with legal charity. The poor man feels no gratitude for a benefit which no one can refuse him, and which could not satisfy him in any case. Public alms guarantee life, but they do not make it happier or more comfortable than individual almsgiving. Legal charity does not thereby eliminate wealth or poverty in society. One class still views the world with fear and loathing, while the other regards its misfortunes with despair and envy. Far from uniting these two nations, the rich and the poor, into a single people, it breaks the only link which could be established between them. It ranges each one under a banner, tallies them, and bringing them face to face prepares them for combat. I have said that the inevitable result of public charity was to perpetuate idleness among the majority of the poor, and to provide for their leisure at the expense of those who work. If the idleness of the rich, a hereditary idleness, merited by work or by services, inspired by intellectual pleasures, moralized by mental exercise, if this idleness, I say, has produced so many vices, what will come of a degraded idleness, obtained by baseness, merited by misconduct, enjoyed in infamy? It becomes tolerable only in proportion to the extent that the soul subjects itself to all this corrupting and degrading. He says, what course of action is left to the conscience, or to human activity in a being so limited, who lives without hope and without fear? He looks at the future as an animal does, absorbed in the present and in the ignoble and transient pleasures it affords. Its brutalized nature is unaware of the determinants of its destiny. Read all the books on pauperism written in England. They boil down to a single deafening cry, the degraded condition into which the lower classes have fallen. And keep in mind that this is several decades before Charles Dickens writes his novels. The number of illegitimate children and criminals grows rapidly and continuously. The indigent population is limitless. The spirit of foresight and savings becomes more and more alien to the poor. While throughout the rest of the nation education spreads, morals improve, tastes become more refined, manners more polished, the indigent remains motionless, or rather he goes backwards. He could be described as reverting to barbarism. Amidst the marvels of civilization, he seems to emulate savage man in his ideas and inclinations. The English parishes are so dominated by the fear that an indigent person might be placed on their rolls and acquire residency, that when a stranger whose clothes do not clearly indicate wealth temporarily settles among them, or when an unexpected misfortune suddenly strikes him, the municipal authorities immediately ask him to post bond against possible indigence, and if the stranger cannot furnish this security, he must leave. Alright. In his trip to Great Britain, he stayed at the house of a proprietor, this is his words, a great proprietor in the south of England at a time when the justices of the peace assembled to pass judgment on the suits brought to court by the poor against the parish, or by the parishes against the poor. He got to sit in on the decisions of whether these people are going to get their poor law benefits or not. And he describes the kind of people that came in the situations that the money was going to. He said, "My host was a justice of the peace, and I regularly accompanied him to court. I find in my travel notes this portrait of the first sitting that I attended." The first, and here's the beginning of his journal entry here. "The first individual who comes before the justices of the peace is an old man. His face is honest and ruddy. He wears a wig and is dressed in excellent black clothes. He seems like a man of property. However, he approaches the bar and passionately protests against the parish administration's injustice. This man is a pauper, and his share of public charity has been unjustly diminished. The case is adjourned in order to hear the parish administrators. After this petulant old man comes a pregnant young woman whose clothes bear witness to recent poverty, and who bears the marks of suffering on her withered features. She explains that some time ago her husband set out on a sea voyage, that since then she has received neither assistance nor news from him. She claims public charity, but the overseer of the poor hesitates to give it to her. This woman's father-in-law is a well-to-do merchant. He lives in the very city where the court is sitting, and it is hoped, too, that in the absence of his son he will certainly want to take responsibility for the maintenance of his daughter-in-law. The justices of the peace summon this man, but he refuses to fulfill the duties imposed on him by nature and not by law. The judges insist. They try to create remorse or compassion in this man's soul. Their efforts fail, and the parish is sentenced to pay the requested relief. After this poor abandoned woman come 5 or 6 big and vigorous men. They are in the bloom of youth. Their bearing is resolute and almost insulting. They lodge a complaint against their village administrators who refuse to give them work, or, for lack of work, relief. He mentions that the Lord, the man who he is accompanying to court, says, "You have just seen in microcosm part of the numerous abuses which the poor law produces. That old man who came first quite probably has the means to live, but he thinks that he has the right to demand that he be supported in comfort, and he does not blush to claim public charity, which has lost all of its afflicting and humiliating character in the people's eyes. That young woman, who seems honest and unfortunate, would certainly be helped by her father-in-law if the poor law did not exist, but interest silences the cry of shame within him, and he unloads a debt on the public that he alone ought to discharge. As for those young people who appeared last, I know them, they live in my village. They are very dangerous citizens and indeed bad subjects. They quickly squander the money they earn in taverns because they know they will be given relief. As you see, they appeal to us at the first difficulty caused by their own shortcomings.